Part 1, Unit 12, Gateway. Food unites as well as distinguishes eaters because what and how one eats forms much of one's emotional tie to a group identity, be it a nation or an ethnicity. The famous 20th century Chinese poet and scholar Lin Yutang remarks, "Our love for fatherland is largely a matter of recollection of the keen sensual pleasure of our childhood. The loyalty to Uncle Sam is the loyalty to American donuts, and the loyalty to the Vaterland is the loyalty to Pfannkuchen and Stollen." Such keen connection between food and national or ethnic identification clearly indicates the truth that cuisine and table narrative occupy a significant place in the training grounds of a community and its civilization. And thus, eating, cooking, and talking about one's cuisine are vital to a community's wholeness and continuation. In other words, the destiny of a community depends on how well it nourishes its members. Exercise 1. Gestures and speech used similar neural circuits as they developed in our evolutionary history. University of Chicago psycholinguist David McNeil was the first to suggest this. He thought nonverbal and verbal skills might retain their strong ties, even though they've diverged into separate behavioral spheres. He was right. Studies confirmed it with a puzzling finding. People who could no longer move their limbs after a brain injury also increasingly lost their ability to communicate verbally. Studies of babies showed the same direct association. We now know that infants do not gain a more sophisticated vocabulary until their fine motor finger control improves. That's a remarkable finding. Gestures are windows into thought processes, McNeil says. Exercise 2. Believe it or not, your child craves limits. She truly needs a flexible sense of order and will grow anxious without it. Think of limits as an expanding corral. Limits provide a physical environment in which your child can feel safe and can learn. As she grows more capable, the boundaries will expand. She begins in the womb, expands to a bassinet, and then to her bed. You may feel your 3-year-old is too young for an overnight visit to a playmate's home. By the time she is 5 or 6, you may occasionally consider it, and by the time she's 10, you may be ready to say yes to a pajama party. Your child's readiness determines how the boundaries expand. Your child does not want control or dominance, but a structure that encourages her to think, to make choices, and to take chances. Exercise 3. Once a staple crop is established, we have what economists call a lock-in. A pattern continues because it is cheap to replicate and would be expensive, both financially and psychologically, to change. The whole of North European agriculture is based around a highly complex but very efficient system of wheat and small grain production. From the plow types to the bakeries and pasta factories, everything is set up to deal with wheat. So, although the potato came early and proved far more productive and well adapted than wheat remains the staple food, except in areas too poor and marginal to afford it. The iron hand of economics forced the impoverished Irish and Poles to live on potatoes in the old days, but they yearned for bread, and now they can afford bread and are eating fewer potatoes. Potatoes added themselves to the system, but did not destroy it. Exercise 4. Marciela Gomez, a doctoral student in pharmacology at Johns Hopkins, is a part Mayan who was raised in a culture that taught the value of waiting for others to speak first. This habit has often caused problems for her in the United States. It is very frustrating because people think I have nothing to add. Sometimes I find that when you wait to speak, The answers are upcoming. In this society, it's so important for individuals to own a point of view that everyone feels the need to be the first to put a certain opinion forward. Oftentimes, if I wait long enough, someone will express my point of view. She adds, sometimes if one waits too long, the subject changes, and then my response is no longer relevant. The need to be heard first seems to be more important than the appropriate response. Exercise 5. The idea of starting at the bottom and working one's way up may appear sound, but the major objection to it is this. Too many of those who begin at the bottom never manage to lift their heads high enough to be seen by opportunity, so they remain at the bottom. It should be remembered also that the outlook from the bottom is not so very bright or encouraging. It has a tendency to kill off ambition. We call it getting into a rut, which means we accept our fate because we form the habit of daily routine, a habit that finally becomes so strong we cease to try to throw it off. And that is another reason why it pays to start 1 or 2 steps above the bottom. By so doing, one forms the habit of looking around, of observing how others get ahead, of seeing opportunity, and of embracing it without hesitation. Exercise 6. Hobbes held that if we knew in advance the worst that war could do to us, that knowledge would be an effective preventative measure. He was writing specifically about civil war, as opposed to international war, because he felt that closeness gives a greater potential to wound. Consider the constructive relations the United States developed with Germany and Japan, beginning immediately after the terrible events of World War II. Then compare that with the overheated emotional reaction you are still bound to get by bringing up the Civil War just about anywhere in the American South. The war between the states is still being fought at home on many levels, almost a century and a half later, while our foreign enemies of 50 years ago are now our friends. Similarly, family feuds are more bitter and lasting than neighborly disputes.